Good day, welcome. This is Sam, Real Guitars. Welcome to the shed. Things moving out of the way. Well, today we've got Stuart's Harley Benton TE70. This is a rosewood Telecaster style, or T style we should call it, guitar, and pretty looking neck on it. Proudly declares made in China, which is no longer anything to be ashamed of. Oh, I've got a plectrum. I have got an amp. All I need now is a cable. And yeah, just a quick sound check on this thing, make sure everything's working. So Stuart's come down from Cambridgeshire and he's down in Devon for a break, and has brought this down with him, and so he's off into the neighbourhood to explore the joys of Tavistock with his wife. So meantime, I've got this, and I'm gonna take it and make it play. So it's basically in for a setup, and what we've got here is one of Harley Benton's budget T copies. Oh, okay. Right, well, I'm umming and ahhing for, you've probably heard it there. So we've got tuning instability here, thanks to this is, by the looks of it, this is a replacement nut. In fact, it's definitely a replacement nut. Got nice sort of fluty T-style noise. Some cleaning in there. Now this thing, you struggle to live with this because for all kinds of reasons, all you need to do is give it a bit of a pull and yikes. For all kinds of reasons, lo and behold, it'll be humongously out of tune. So even with the string stretch, okay, so just the main things work, bit of crackliness in the pots, and basically what we've got here is a typical mosquito. The shed's full of them for some reason. Wet weather, still humid. Anyway, yeah, it's a typical budget T style thing. It's got really nice sounding Wilkinson pickups because I think they're pretty good for the money. It's a beautiful looking guitar, and apart from the setup, now this isn't factory. That's the first thing to tell you. This is not factory. This has been worked on by somebody, and what they've done is that they've replaced the nut. And I had a feeling they might have done some fret leveling at some point, because the frets look a little bit rounded or flattened for my liking, but I don't know what the originals are like. Anyway, so what we've got here is we've got a guitar that currently has got just a terrible tuning issues around the nut, binding, and not least on these string trees here, which I'm going to treat with a bit of grease at some point, but I really would recommend that Stuart change them out for a pair of the Tusq ones for about 10, 12, 14 pounds or whatever the cost is. So it's everything that's here that should be here, but that nut is clearly, I can see it's been put in afterwards because it's actually sort of a bit V-shaped in its size, but we can still work with it. It's been cut low-ish, but we can still go down a little bit, so it's all kind of within working distance. So this is just going to be the kind of thing that's going to mostly improve this guitar, is getting the nut right, minimizing the pull of these string trees, or the catchiness, and getting all the slack out of these strings before we kind of go any, or before we give the guitar back to Stuart. So also I'm going to tighten up this here, put some Loctite on the jack button, jack screw socket, and just probably take the control plate off and spray some good stuff under there, just to try and get rid of the crackles on here. So with a good setup, this thing should play really nicely. Now what I don't know about this right this second is what the radius is. I could go online. It looks bigger than a 9.5 to me, so I suspect it's more like a 12. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the relief, because at the moment this thing has very little relief at all in the neck. I think it's practically, oh no, actually I lie, it's actually got enough. I looked at the inside. No, okay, that's fine. There goes the capo. What I'm going to do then is set the action as low as we want it. At the moment, even wherever it's currently set, which, look at this, the playing action at this end is currently set at about 2. Yeah, just over 2, but it's so it's struggling at that. So I'm going to set it down this end nice and low, the way we want it. And do that straight away, because we're on a time clock here, because Stuart and his wife are in town, and I've got to get this done. Now this is done in pairs. So the intonation again is subject to being done in pairs, which some people really hate, and some people, first thing they do is change it out for a 6 separate individual saddle bridge. I haven't found personally too much of a problem with the pairs. I found that they usually intonate. So I'm just making sure I'm going from 1.5 and just gradually going down to 1 at the high E, and then we're going to see how well that plays or doesn't. But what we're going to expect that to play badly, because it will currently be set as low as it can go without losing notes, really. That's a sort of typical playing action. So by taking this down a little bit, I'm going to obviously push the strings further into the problem zone, where the uneven frets are going to really show up as slightly unplayable. So that's the action set the way I want it, pretty quick. I'm hoping this will just all be very straightforward within the 3-hour slot. My focus is really going to be very heavily on the nut end as well, because combined with so-so tuners, it's making tuning feel very imprecise at the moment. Okay, so this is our target action at this end, and I'm still going to go and readjust the action at this end next. So pretty much unplayable on the A and the E, but we'll come to that. The aim is to make the frets comply with that and do what we want. So that's what the fret leveling is going to be for. But the next, hello Morris, come up, say hello. You haven't been in here for ages. Come on. How are you doing? You're nice and warm. Ooh, nice wet nose. Have you been out hunting things? or you're going to notice that in here I've got a sickly vole that your sister brought in yesterday, and she left here, and I thought it was practically dead, but it bit the hell out of my finger, drew blood. And then I kind of got a really sore finger for a while, thinking this is going to go poisonous and I'm going to die from vole poisoning. Really painful. But it wasn't you, it was your sister, wasn't it, Mr. Beard? He's growing his rough back. He's getting very majestic as the autumn approaches. Now you're going to need to move, because I haven't got time to be too petting and friendly with you, because we're on the clock for getting Stuart's guitar done. So yeah, so the point is, the typical, come on then, look, there's a stool for you. Come on on the stool. There you go, good boy. Come on, up here on the stool. Right or not? Yeah, this is a very good example of a typical guitar that will, you may buy online or something that you'll. Let's just try and put this out of the way. Sorry, I've got a piece of wire getting in the way. Yeah, a guitar that will be set to as low an action as it can go, but not where you want it, and then you lower the action to where you want it, and it's not playable. So this is what it takes to put that right, and there is no other way other than adjusting the frets. You've got to work on the frets to make the action you want play. It simply will not. There's no amount of truss rod bending you can do that's going to clear the uneven frets underneath here that are causing those buzzes. You have to do it mechanically. You may adjust the truss rod, and as a secondary effect you may find there's more room in the middle, ergo you may find it clears up some of the buzzing, but you're just exchanging, you're trading playing action for clearance over the frets, which makes the kind of hides or masks the uneven frets, the buzzing or the choking. Okay, so you could do that. Instead of doing the neck, you could do that by raising the action at the bridge, and then hey presto, no more buzzing, but you're back to where you started with a low action. So the point is, if you want a low action and no buzzing, you have to work on the frets. There isn't a sneaky truss rod adjustment you can do. Now, Mister, stay away, because I'm working. I haven't got time to chat just now. Morris, my cup of tea. Look, Morris, you really do have to go somewhere else right now. Come on. I know you want loves and attention and stuff, but I've got this guitar to do and we're going to run out of time. And although Stuart and his wife may enjoy the thrills of Goosey Fair in Tavistock, the once yearly thing, is a bit like Groundhog Day in Tavistock. No, I've never actually been to it, but anyway, go away. So I'm going to do this as if it was going for an 11 set, okay? Sorry, a 10 set. So I'm going to set 13 as my first one. So here's my logic: is I go way over the set. So I'm going 13, 16, okay, which is quite a lot over what you'd think I'd need. But it's going to give me plenty of clearance, so the strings never bind. That's really important for me. And it's going to allow Stuart to go up to a set larger without binding later, because this thing is really, really important, getting these right, because first of all, if it's ever tight and you get binding of the string, you lose your tuning stability. Simple as that. It's gone, and that's your enjoyment of the guitar gone due to a simple problem, really. So getting this thing to play and stay in tune, for me, is actually my #1 priority of all the things. Getting it to play with a nice low light action is secondary, isn't quite the word, but that's great too. But there's no point even having a low action if it doesn't play and stay in tune. So playing and staying in tune is the #1 priority, and that's what I'm aiming for in taking time on the nut. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get my gauge and I'm going to set for 0.3, which is my standard conservative workable action. Good, Morris is gone for now. And I'm going to go back over this nut and make sure these slots or the strings are, I thought it was in the bin for a minute. Yeah, we just got enough room, which is good. So I can get these set a little bit lower, get them to where they should be or where I want them, make sure they're wide enough, and then I'm also going to cut down on the excess material afterwards. I'll get the Dremel on it because we don't need all of this spare material above the strings. It just makes it look untidy. So I'm just clearing out the way. The thing about the nut is that if you have, I learned the hard way, is if you get the if you buy a set of files for exactly the gauge you're going to be playing, the mechanics of the nut slot, which has a certain depth to it, so you've got a slot cut through a piece of bone or whatever it is. In this case it's bone, I'm pretty sure. That slot will not be laser straight when you cut it. You can't cut it laser straight unless you've got a laser or some sort of tool like that. So what you'll end up with is that the clearance that you had, if any, was practically none. If you've got a 9 gauge file and you put a 9 string into it, that is practically going to touch the sides. The minute any distance of your slot has a curve in it of any kind, you'll cancel out, not only you'll cancel out any space or clearance that your 9 had, you will actually bind the string instantly into that slot. It will be the slightest bit of movement or curvature in the slot will cancel out any spare clearance you had, and that just means you're going to bind. And the thicker the slot, like a Les Paul, the more likely that's going to happen. And so you need to be cutting with a bit of spare room. Of course, also you want to cut with a bit of room to allow you to go up in a gauge of strings if you want. You might say, I'm going to go from a 9s next to a 10s, and you don't want that to bind in the slot, because your number one thing of a guitar that plays and stays in tune will be gone again. Strings will be caught in the slots and choking, going out of tune. So it makes sense for 2 reasons. One, because the slot is never cut straight and the nut has a certain depth of material. And 2, because you're always going to want to put a larger gauge in at some point. It makes sense to always overcut your nut slots, which is what I'm doing here. And I'm starting with an assumption of 10s, and I'm overcutting for 10s because I want this guitar to be capable of changing at least to 10s without any trouble at all. Now this is just sitting just over there. I'm going to call that good. Yeah, so you can see that I'm cutting for 10s, overcutting. Now these tuners, although they're a bit lacking in precision, so that when you turn them sometimes nothing happens and it takes up the slack in the cogs or something, they're a little bit imprecise. This one's already overcut by the looks of it. We've got 2 different things going on here now. So the question is here, do we lose this nut for a replacement? Since one of these is already overcut. Now, a replacement nut is included in the price of this setup. However, the problem is this is somebody's already overcut the slot on here, which means this nut is bigger than a standard nut. I'm just going to measure what we've actually got as a clearance here, and I might set this as the denominator. Okay, well that's 0.25, so in that case, if I am going to go with that, which the guitar can tolerate, I need to go backwards, and for precision's sake I need to make the other one do the same. there's quite a bit of leeway or clearance there. So yeah, so the same principle applies. I'm going to make sure this is working all the way through for a 10 set. Right, there you go, that one's good. Now the thing about doing the nut slots and lowering the first fret action is that not only does it it's a part of the process of making sure this runs smoothly, but it also sets a very low first fret action, which for not necessarily just a beginner, but particularly important for beginners. If those people are new to learning, it makes a very light and low first fret action, and that makes chords played down here very easy to play, and that's a very nice thing. In fact, the improvement of the playing action at this end has a bigger net effect on how the guitar feels to play than adjusting the action at the other end, where we're kind of more familiar to talk about the playing action. You know, people often talk about it getting unplayable as it goes further up the neck. Well, actually, the action that tires you out most is down this end, believe it or not. Because in a way you rarely venture up, or it's not so common that you venture up there to play bar chords. I mean, you want to, but it's less usual. It's down here that you play most of the time, and small improvements to playing action down here make a massive improvement, or massively improve the or reduce the tiredness you get from playing down at this end. So this is what setting one of the major benefits of setting a low first fret action down here is. Now, and I think that'll do me. There are other benefits, of course, and one of them is that when you set a low first fret action, you're not only obviously cleaning out the slots as we're doing now to make sure this thing plays and stays in tune, but you're also fixing what can be a significant intonation problem. When the first fret action is too high, to fret notes down here, whether it's chords or single notes, you have to press quite hard on the string to make them reach, to make sure the strings reach the top of the frets, and in doing so you can drive the strings sharp so that fretted notes end up sharper than the open notes, and that has a significant impact on open chords, which can result in them sounding like a bag of garbage. And the amount of height required for that to be the case is very, very small, as all the measurements here are. So if, in my experience, if for example the first fret action is around about 0.5 of a millimetre or any higher, you can very easily start making ending up with notes, fretted notes at this end of the neck going sharp, with the result that you might tune the open strings perfectly, and then play a D chord, an open D. 3 of the notes there are fretted and 3 aren't, and the 3 that are fretted will be driven sharp by the act of fretting them, because the action on the first fret is too high, and the 3 that aren't fretted, the open strings, will be perfectly in tune with the tuner, but the 2 sets of 3 together will be out of tune with each other, and it will sound truly and spectacularly awful to anyone with even vaguely musical ear. So that's one of the significant benefits of getting this first fret action right. I'm going to stop there, it's pretty low. Okay, so we can get this one out. A 16. Okay, so so it kind of, in that, thinking about it in that order of priority. Can't get this out. Darn! I'll have to cut this. I didn't really want to do that. Let's just drop it on the floor. That's the easiest way. Okay. Turn that off. Save batteries. Yeah. So focusing on the nut really, really critical, because it's where most of your playability will come from. It's where your tuning stability will reside. 50% of your tuning stability. The other 50% will be in the unreleased slack that usually remains in most people's strings once they put them on. You need to wring that slack out, otherwise it will, as you saw just then when I pulled the strings, it will still be releasing itself later in the day. Usually when you're playing and the result of the slack kind of coming out of your strings is that they go out of tune. So again, a very important component of tuning stability is the unreleased slack in your strings. Now this nut is now quite deep, the slots in here are quite deep, so I'm going to just kind of open them up a little bit because I can hardly get the whatchamacallums files into here now. I'm going to do it for this top one too. This is because there's too much unnecessary nut material above the string, and it just is making getting the file in and out difficult, and it's catching just by virtue of putting it into the slot. So we don't want that. We want to be able to get this in there and use it. And I'm going to take away all of this spare material in a minute with a Dremel. Just grind it all down. It's not needed. You've got to be very, very careful at this point because it's very easy to go into overcut mode. I like it. In which case it's really, there's a number of get out of jails you can do, but you're probably looking at a new nut in this case. Okay, so let's have a look. We're nearly there. I'm going to use this end of the file because it's a little bit sharper and cuts a little bit better. So I've used the lowest common denominator of the nut that I inherited, which was 0.25. Now I'm doing that because I know that with 0.25 I can get a good playing action at the nut. If it had been any much lower than that, then I would have been considering replacing the nut. You can go as low as 0.1, and in a sense that's pretty much what you have when you have a capo on, somewhere around about that region. But 0.25 is conservatively okay. It's a safe and low first fret action. Okay, now I'm looking across and I can see the little reflections, so it's all very nice and low. Okay, so straight away I can pick the guitar up and I can feel a difference. Okay, so now what we've got is, notwithstanding the buzzing of the notes, which we know we're going to get, we've got the neck relief set where we want it, we've got the first fret action set universally nice and low, we've got the last fret action set low where we want it from 1.5 down to 1 at the high E, and we've got probably a radius of what looks like a 12, and a 12 should be able to go to that playing action with some fret leveling. So I've got no doubt that fret leveling will achieve that. So the next thing to do, having got those three things done, and obviously before doing any fret leveling I'm confident that I've got enough material to achieve the playability I want. If it was a 9.5 radius, you can still get the action low, but the geometry doesn't permit bends at the same kind of, it permits bends, but you have to have on a higher action. It's not to do with the condition of the frets. It's to do with the geometry of bending a string effectively up a hill in 3D, if you think about it. But on something like this with a 12.5 radius, which I'll confirm in a minute, or even a 9.5, we can still aim for that 1.5 last fret action. So just a checklist is: neck relief is right, bridge action is right, nut action is now right, everything else is working okay. There's no problems stopping us doing this. So I'm now going to set up the frets ready for fret leveling and go ahead and do the fret leveling. And once the fret leveling is done, then I'm going to take this off and I'm going to do the shaving down of the nut. I'm going to lubricate the string trees here. I'm going to take out the control panel, clean up the pots in there. I'm going to reattach the jack socket there, and do all of that before we put the strings back on, the new strings on. And what that'll do is, once we do this part now, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the strings off so I can mark up the frets. Once we've done the fret leveling, we can then take everything, the set strings can come right off, and once we replace the strings with 9s and load the neck again, it goes back into its loaded configuration like it was when we leveled it, and that will kind of recreate the same levelness, if you get what I mean. Now, my only concern at all about these frets is they are quite low profile to start with. Now, I don't know whether that's because they've been worked on before. The nut certainly has been replaced by the previous owner, so it may be possible that the frets have also been worked on. But what obviously is a kind of flag for me at this point is how much life there is in the frets or not. And so I need to, my priority is to get the playing action we want, but with the minimal fret loss. I mean, that's a priority all the time anyway, and it's why I prefer to use the method I use, because it allows me to remove the minimum amount of fret material. But you know, with a guitar like this, I don't want to pursue an ultra low action and end up with frets that don't feel like they've got any form to them at all, because it's, you've obviously got to weigh up what you're starting with. And what you'll end up with. Okay, so there's our nearly set up guitar, and the next bit is to get the fret leveling equipment out. Now, in this case, I'm going to use the thin and slightly flexible one. It's an interesting, you know, some people I discuss this with online now and then. You know, we have lots of discussions about why I would use this particular tool and not another one, a stiffer one or a wider one or whatever. And I guess there's just, it's hard to describe why, but there are times when I kind of get an intuitive feeling why I'm going to use one and not the other. This one is thinner, a little bit finer tuning. You can finer tune it to the curve, although it's flexible in a sense, and so therefore you can lose the shape of it in the process of doing your fret leveling. So I'm going to start with this off, and I'm going to basically use little adjustments here to match the curve. That's all that I'm doing really. Is I'm just copying or mimicking the relief curve. There's too many words start with the same letters. I'm copying the relief curve, the longitudinal bowing of the neck, using this tool and these three little feet and the I'm making absolutely tiny adjustments with the Allen key until I'm confident, from experience and having done this loads of times before, I'm confident that that curve is now, the curve in the rod is now exactly the same as in the neck. And when I've done that, I proceed to allow the tool, pretty much under gravity at this point, to just go onto the neck in its plane configuration, including its curve and its longitudinal compression. That's the important bit that a lot of people who criticise this method haven't factored in and don't understand why it matters, but there's a longitudinal compression on this wood that has an effect on where the frets sit, and when I'm using this method, it takes care of it, or it levels the frets with that compression in play. If you level the frets with the neck passively flattened, you might get level frets with the neck flat, but when you put it under load, not only does it curve, which is fine, it's still relatively level, it curves, but it also compresses, and the compression makes the frets sit in different places. So it's really important, and as I said, those people who haven't thought it through often fail to take that longitudinal compression into consideration. So what I'm doing there is I'm both looking and listening to make sure that I'm looking to level these frets only so far as is required to make the notes play cleanly the way I want them to for the action I've chosen. So that's another thing that's important about this method, is that it levels only up to a point. I don't care about any unevenness in these frets below the action I've chosen, below the level that impacts on the action I've chosen. So I'm not aiming for absolute levelness. I just want all of these notes to play well for the action I've chosen. And that's the aim of the game. And I can see that the tool is pretty much touching all of the frets now, so everything's getting a little bit of a cut, which is a good sign. It means that the rod is actually configured to the right curve. I'm going to stop at that point because I don't want to wear these things any further down. If, for example, there's a bit of that in there, I would rather go up a quarter of a turn on the action than to take too much fret metal away. So I'm going to stop there. I'm also going to recalibrate because I'm using the finer of the two rods that I use. So I'm going to recalibrate for the next track, although normally I use the same setting. I've got a little bit of a undoing that's happened, so a tiny turn on this. Pretty much back on track. So now I'm going to do the B track, as I call it. Now obviously while I'm doing this, I'm conscious that I'm just conscious of what's happening when I'm doing this. So the first fret action I set a little while back is currently increasing because I'm taking off a tiny fraction of metal off the frets at both ends of the neck, but all over, so that the action over the first fret is just marginally increasing, not by a lot but by a small amount. I'm just going to check the action on here again. Probably need my other eyes. It feels very low. Yeah, it's barely on one. Just on one. Just on one. Tiny bit under. Okay. Right, now I'm going to recalibrate for the G track and so on and so on. So what it means is that I'm going to get a set of relatively leveled frets along the curve that this guitar has when it's strung with nines. Okay, so when it's strung with 9s and when the neck is compressed with the load of a set of 9s, which I'm going to replace when I come to put new strings on. So doing it in this configuration means that I'm going to get as close to level as possible, and it is a little bit more accurate, not a huge amount, but it's more accurate for this reason, because it's got that longitudinal compression currently at play as I'm leveling, as opposed to reintroducing it later, and so that gives us an extra percentage. But in truth, as I explained to many people many times, that additional accuracy isn't the primary reason. It's not the primary reason I use this method, and the primary reason I use this method is for limiting the amount of fret metal that's removed to the bare minimum. That's what I'm really bothered about. The fact that it's 5 to 10% more accurate than the conventional passively flattened neck levelled with a sanding beam method is a bonus, but it's not the reason I do it. It's a byproduct. It's simple to say is I'm aiming to do it with the compression already at play, and the only way I can get the compression at play is by having the strings on and the neck loaded, and as a result of having the strings on and the neck loaded, as it is when you're playing, therefore I have to also have a curve, which is kind of immaterial in this, it's just by the by, but the reason the curve is there is as a byproduct of the loading, which is what I'm aiming for. That's my concern, is to have the longitudinal compression loading, and the curved neck comes with the territory, but hence the ability to curve this tool and achieve the results. So it's just about knowing what you're aiming for and why you're doing things, and it's like that with anyone who ever disagrees or has a different opinion on how something should be done. I welcome different opinions on how things should be done when they're shared respectfully and backed by credible reasons for something being the case. And if either or both of those conditions aren't met, i.e. it's done from a grandstanding, somebody's trying to prove themselves better than me because they're right and I'm wrong, or it's done just because they say so or somebody clever told them so, but isn't backed up by evidence, then I'm not interested. It's just pointless and doesn't progress anywhere. And I've said quite many times before, if there's one thing when you arrive on these videos, there's one thing you can be absolutely sure about, is that if I'm doing something one way, it is because I've done it successfully that way 300, 400 more times, and there's a reason for doing it that way. I think the thing that pisses me off faster than anything else in YouTube comments is this blind and arrogant assumption that people have, is that A, you're doing something wrong, and B, you're too stupid. You just chose that. You didn't have a good reason for doing what you're doing. You just did it because you woke up one day and you were stupid enough to try it that way, and that's why you did it. And that the world would be a lot better place if people could begin with the sort of fairly realistic assumption or reasonable assumption that if I'm doing something a certain way, it's because A, I've thought it through a hell of a lot, and B, I've tested it and put it to work, and I have evidence and results that confirm to me why it's worth doing that way. And to assume anything else, to assume that I just do it because one day I was bored and I kind of read it somewhere, or I thought of doing it that way on a whim, it's just utterly arrogant, and it's completely destructive as well. But it's a shame I should have to continue to say it. Getting better, but there's still a little bit of that zizzing and buzzing going on in there. Again, at this point, as I'm starting to kind of work down on what I know of two of the troublesome parts, or the A and the E part of the frets, I'm obviously really conscious about what's happening with the fret metal, and I'm looking carefully to make sure that in order to get these notes playing at this action, I'm not going to put myself into paint myself into a corner as far as fret metal goes. I want to be confident that I've got enough to work with at all times, otherwise it's pointless. That's pretty good. I can live with that for now. Now I'm going to do the low E finally, and yeah, where it's going nicely so far. Yeah, it's a bit annoying to have to kind of keep making that point, and I know that most people who, no, a lot of people who watch stuff don't start from an assumption that somebody just decided with no good grounds just to do stuff a certain way. But it's there are just a surprising amount of people who do behave as if that's how they see, you know, that they are making that assumption. It's no wonder YouTube comments descend into conflict so much of the time. I think it's partly because of that. It's such a hopeless start point, you know, that it wouldn't occur just for some bizarre reason. People can't be far enough outside of their own experience to even consider that you do something a certain way because it works 400 times in a row and you get great results and you've got 400 customers who are really happy with what you did. Now what we've got here is a couple of low frets, and that's what's making these buzz. And that's the challenge on a neck like this, is that the low frets kind of define what's possible, and they cost you the fret metal on the high frets. And at some point you have to decide whether it's worth bottoming out. And somebody was asking me those questions the other day, is, you know, how do you make that decision? And I think it's an experience call, really. Sometimes you can only kind of work out that you've got a major problem with significantly low frets when when you've got a certain way into doing the fret leveling, and then you have to stop and think, well, what am I going to do to correct this? And sometimes it's around about that time you might start to see telltale, or your kind of brain, you can detective work and find out why you've got two really low frets here which are causing the ones afterwards to be unplayable. And it could be because somebody's done some work on these separate from everything else, which kind of can fix an immediate problem, but for example it may get rid of a burr or a gash or a gouge on here. But what you end up with is a sort of a dip, a trough that the notes here fall into, which cause buzzing on the following frets. But once you pass that, everything's pretty much okay again. And the question is can I see any evidence of that? You know, has somebody lowered these on purpose? And I can't see evidence of that, to be honest. I'm going to go back to the A and the E and do them kind of over again once each, and then I'm going to stop and reconsider. And if I think it's going to end up costing too much material all said and done, then we may be in a situation where we have no choice but to fractionally raise the action to overcome the effects of this trough. And that can be the compromise we have to come to sometimes. It doesn't have to be much of an adjustment, to be honest. The amount of action lifting you have to do to overcome that, or to lift the strings above that level, is pretty small. But it's kind of annoying because, you know, it can be what stops you reaching a nice low action that you you really were after. Okay, I'm going to give this low E one more go. So each time I'm calibrating, I'm not going to take for granted that the curve is anywhere near the same. And this will be the last time on this track, and what I'll do is, if I can't free up those notes and those frets now, if those low frets are going to stay costing me that action, then we may just have to raise the action. I can see it right now. I can see a lot taken off here and here, and these two haven't been touched yet. And the question is how far is it going to, how long is it going to take us to bottom out those two, and you know, will we be putting ourselves at a disadvantage everywhere else but there? So I'm just kind of watching out for the point at which I can see these fret tops cutting, where I can stop the game. It still hasn't got there. It's incredible. So whatever happened to those frets, they've ended up lower than everything else. So I'm just going to keep going a little bit, on the basis that you can actually always go a lot further than you initially think. But yeah, there's two low, seriously low frets there. So let's just check this action one more time, because rather than take any more material, it could just get that spot on, and that could be everything we need to do. We're pretty much close to on. Okay, so I wish I had more light over here. Okay. Quite low. I'm not even touching the ground for starters. Okay, that's quite low as well. Okay, 1.5. 1.5, 1.4, a bit low. One point two-ish, 1.2-ish, one very low. It's that one note there, and it's the dead spot. It's the low. I'm going to do a tiny bit more fret work on there, but that's the lot after this. I don't want to go any further. But it's courtesy of a hole in the seabed. Why that's like that, your guess is as good as mine. It could even be. It could be, like I say, somebody had gouged them, put a dent in them. Somebody had gone in with a piece of sandpaper and a block of a fret rubber and just worn away at it until the gouge is gone, and it looks nice, but you've got a low spot compared to the surrounding areas. Now what I'm going to do, and I'm going to try a little trick here, I'm just going to marginally over tighten this, and that's a bit cheeky because I'm just going to the tiniest fraction put a bit extra curve in the middle to get into that hole. Now that's a strange thing to do, but we'll see. I'm just going to gently run this backwards and forwards for a while, because we're nearly almost there, but just a tiny fraction off. Wow. I'm going to take a picture of this in a second just to show you the difference between the frets next door to each other, using what is in every which way a very precise method, but it just goes to show how vastly lower, or relatively considerably lower, these two are compared to the ones next door. And it's quite astonishing how that happens. Let's see, where's that one? That one's there. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Don't want to take any more material. We're at the limits of what I'm comfortable doing. The only way I'm going to get round that is to raise this. Now if we just go in and listen to the smallest amount of raisingnesses on this. Okay, I'm stopping there. It's pretty low, it's almost exactly where I wanted, but we are just fractionally limited by those two trench basically in the fretboard, for reasons I can't see obvious. Sometimes if they've been damaged visibly, you might see a bit of fingerboard damage either side, maybe, you know, like where the guitar's fallen over and done some damage, but on this one I can't see any of the obvious evidence of damage to the edge of the fingerboard or anything like that, so I can't tell you right now why those are so low. I can't see how they could have been hammered in so effectively by comparison to the ones around it, because that's a massive difference between the two. So I suspect that for one reason or another, the previous owner has spot leveled them or spot polished them to their own satisfaction and left us with a hole, and it's quite common. Okay, so having done the leveling bit, as far as I'm going to go with it, and the rest is going to have to be a very small action tweak if we're going to do anything, but it's pretty good actually. Certainly better than it was. What I'm now doing is I'm going to dispose of these strings, take them off. These are our sort of sacrificial strings that have served their purpose. I know they were pretty new, I think, when Stuart put them on, but they've served their purpose for this setup, which is to just act as guides for the time being. Try and get them out without poking holes in my fingers. I had enough from the vole bites yesterday. I don't want any more bleeding fingers. See, pings back. Right, so while I've got this off, I'm going to do the reshaping of the nut, and I'm going to do a few other bits and pieces while we're in this place. Now these are through the body and out the back strings, so I can. Sorry, not through the body, through the bridge and out the back strings is what I meant to say. So I'm just going to slice them here for now, make the job easier, and then push them out the back. again, one of the final things I'm going to do on this obviously is check and set the intonation if it needs adjustment. It looks like it could be wrong. Unfortunately, as I said to Stuart, your little words, your little Wilkinson silver words float around. There's nothing, I haven't done anything to them, but they just fall off under their own free will. They're not a great idea, but there's nothing you can do about it, they just fall off. Okay, so the first bit is to get the Dremel out and to get the right device. Come on, Dremel. Currently I've got a router bit on there which needs to go out of the way. I need to find me the correct thing, which will be in here. It's going to get a bit noisy and bone tingling. So I'm going to just take this down basically, and I'm going to use two hands all the time. This thing is loose in here, that's worrying me. I don't want it firing around and changing position because it'll just negate everything I've just done. If that's bone, it's not smelling like bone, which is quite interesting, but I mean, that's possible. Hellfire, I mean, I'm not exactly a bone smelling aficionado, but bone normally has a particularly pungent smell to it, like burning hair kind of thing. Okay, so there's the kind of shrinking down of the saddle, so it's not a whole bunch of stuff in the way. Now that's that bit done. While I've got the top off here, I might as well, not much, but I'm going to get under the hood and just spray out these various bits here. This is a bit off centre. I don't know if that's wobbly, but I had a Harley Benton Telecaster kit, and it's a bit off centre that, but anyway, well, yeah, I had a Harley Benton Tele kit, and the switch was the stickiest, the strongest thing I've ever seen. It was quite incredible. So I'm just going to blow some air through these pots, and out of the way of the body I'm going to fire the smallest amount of what's that stuff called, you know, cleaner. If you're going to use it, make sure it goes on and then gets dried off any spillage or excess, because you don't want it on the lacquer. I'm not sure what it would do to this stuff, but I've seen it make a mess of lacquer before in different circumstances. Okay, so now while I'm at it, sorry about this boring camera view, I'm now going to mark up all the frets again, because now what I'm going to do is I'm going to re-profile them. Technically people call it re-crowning. I call it re-profiling because the aim is not to touch the crown actually, because the crown represents the perfect relative levelness of everything. So the last thing I really want to do is adjust that, but I want to reshape the sides of the fret around or away from that crown to take off any flat square edges. Okay, I'm just going to do this back up, out of the way. Often, if you do have crackly pots, a way to take care of it is a mixture of a little bit of this blowing out dust and stuff, but mostly use. It's the quickest way to kind of remake the contacts is just to be using it. So lots of use, but a bit of a blast through like that doesn't hurt. Okay, so I'm going to get the fret level crowning or reprofiling file. Now these are medium jumbo. I wouldn't say they were anywhere jumbo, so I'm going to start with use a medium edge. And I can see that on this side there's quite a bit of work to do because it's obviously flattened out quite a lot compared to the other side, and the aim is to shine or cut the frets until the edges kind of shine up and you're left with a thin black line of marker pen that's untouched, which is your way of knowing that you've both reshaped the flattened fret but without touching the top, and therefore without adjusting the relative levelness between it and the neighbouring frets, which is what of course the whole exercise was about. And you can see I'm working harder on this base side of it because of the amount of relatively larger amount of levelling I've had to do over here. It's going to get worse down there as we know. Well, it's an interesting day in guitar arrivals today because obviously we've got this one on a quick turnaround for Stuart, which has been kind of booked in for some time now, but also Hugh came over with his vintage 1970s Electra Les Paul stylish thing. It's not called that, it's an MPC guitar, and it's the, damn, I've forgotten the name of the guitarist, Allman Brothers guitarist. I didn't recognise the name, but anyway, it's a model that he played, and so he brought me that one over for a refret and a bit of cleaning up the electrics a little bit, and along with that, it's a small world, he brought a Sun Mustang that I'd spotted on eBay, or not eBay, the local for sale sites on Facebook, and I know the seller very well, so it's and Hugh's from outside of the neighbourhood, or outside of the region a little bit. He's come over from a bit further away, so he stopped in at my pal's house, and he brought it from James, who is the guy I got the burr wood that I'm currently making my most recent two Oakcasters out of. James sold me that, and so James has also sold Hugh the Sun Mustang. So I've got that to spruce up as well, which is going to be great. I like a good Sun Mustang. It's going to stay sort of in its original, I won't say mucky, but its original, what's the word I'm looking for? Road worn, probably, condition, because it's just old and it's never going to get much younger looking. Now this is an interesting situation. I'm going to take this out because I want to, you can't really see it, but basically I want to tighten up this jack socket, but I want to get it out so I can get some thread lock onto it before I do it up and tighten it up. So here we have the contacts, and it's set in such a way that we don't have a lot of room. The supporting screw and nut underneath is quite it stops us having much poke through is what I guess I'm looking for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some blue thread lock onto here because we want this knot to move anywhere, and jack plugs coming undone and basically going AWOL and then breaking the electrical contacts is a very common thing, and we could really do without it. Mainly because the jack is under so much levering forces that it's almost guaranteed to break at some point. It's quite hard to get this on, but I don't have a lot of reach into here on the best of times, so I'm going to just pull this in a little bit, bend these in so they're not touching the walls, do this back up, and then I'm going to try and use my little machine, my StewMac tool, to just finish off the tightening process. Let's go on this side first where I can see it, and then this one. Yeah, so it's always a pretty much guaranteed source of trouble is the jack socket, because there's so much movement, and as I always go on about, electrics and movement just do not mix. So what I can do is I don't get hardly any purchase room, so there's always a little bit on the not ideal side. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my StewMac thing in here, turn it one way, and I'm going to use my pliers to attempt to turn it the other way. I don't even have any grip with my adjustable spanner, unfortunately. It's not a good design. This is kind of out of reach of pretty much everything you've got. I don't think there's in fact I know there isn't even a spanner you can get into that space, so you've got it's not an ideal device, I have to say. I mean, the only other way is to, you still don't really get much of a grip on it, is to take this out and do it from the back and hold it, but again, there's practically no there's no purchase on the very little purchase on the nut from this other side. I'll try my best, but that's all I'm going to get out of it. Physically cranked as hard as I could do it by hand. Right, let's get this around. Where are we? That's the right place. That hurt the hands, but yeah, just a dopey design, really. I mean, guaranteed to be difficult, and then ultimately guaranteed to break on your. Sorry, not very good. Not very exciting, I know. Right, you can still see a bit of the old blue stuff on there, but I don't mind. It's my marker of, you can see it's been done. Okay, so there's my frets now re-profiled. So the next thing to do is I'm just going to add a bit of grease under these things, ready for when we put the strings back in. Excuse I. Let's give this a little clean off. Rosewood. Never quite sure. Is this this is a rosewood veneer? Yeah, it's on the headstock. So what I'll do is I'm just going to give these the tiniest dab of grease under there for when it comes to restringing. Probably might. That will do. I was trying to think whether it's better to do it before or after, but I'll just put a tiny blob under the leading edge, and I'm just trying to reduce some of the friction, because these things have quite a steep angle, and the string is under a lot of pressure as it comes out, a lot of force acting on it as it comes out and emerges from that string tree. It's just really dopey. It's not what you want. So highly recommended you change it for a Tusq one that at least is slightly rubbery. By the time you're here, you don't need a solid material. Like, you need a solid material for the nut, but you don't need one for those string trees. You just need something that keeps them in position and stops them from stops the strings from buzzing and holds them, you know, kind of down at the right angle. But it doesn't have to be. Doesn't matter if it's you know, a nice soft material. Whereas it does matter if you use a soft plastic for the nut. It's definitely not what you want. So I'm just going to give the fingerboard a sort of clean off any residual goop from someone else. At the same time, it's always a good one because I can make sure I do the sides of the frets here and get rid of any marker pen at this stage. Just saves me trying to get it off later. This is naphtha, or Coleman cooking fluid. So what we've seen so far is the kind of probably the most important thing about this guitar was the state of the nut and its contribution to making a guitar that's just felt horribly difficult to tune just from the first handling of it that I did. So taking care of the nut in detail to fix that and make it stable, and then obviously taking care of a few other details like the crackling of the pots, the sticky harshness of the string trees. Also we've got these tuners feel a bit crappy, and I'm going to just gently tweak them so that they've all got hopefully the same kind of stiffness. It's not that critical, but it kind of can help to just feel a little bit more positive, although, you know, the cheapness of the gearing in a way is usually what leads you to how it feels. You know, these are quite loose, see? So it's better to have them done up to a similar amount each, and then you get a sort of a more positive feel to the turning, which, you know, in terms of taking care of all the other little things, leaves a much better playing experience by the end of it. Okay, so now we're in a position to mask off the neck, ready for the sanding process. I'm going to check the time. We started at 1. It's now 2:11, so we've been at it an hour and 15-ish. So we're on track, on target. Now this bit is going to just take time. Those of you who want to see it, it's probably in some of my other videos, but Stuart, for your information, what I'm going to do now is obviously I'm masking off the fretboard to protect it, and then I'm going to get a series of sandpapers and work through on the frets, polishing them from 600 grit to 1000 and then to 1500, and then once I've got to 1500 I'm going to then use a micromesh set from 1500 through to 12,000, by the end of which they'll be shiny and play ready, and that will be the main part of the fret leveling and re-crowning and polishing done. And then what I'll do is oil the fingerboard and then restring, check the final tweaks of the action, and then do the intonation, check and set the intonation as a final move. So I'm just going to put this to one side, because what I need to do now is get me I need a set of strips of masking tape cut thinner to accommodate the smaller frets. So this gives me a way to cover up everything and protect everything. I won't show the polishing process on video because it's about half an hour of aerobic mind-numbing boredom, unlike anything else you've just watched. Yeah, but I don't need to inflict that on you. So let's get me a clean blade for this. It's always easier when it cuts this straight off. Okay. So it's all pretty tried and tested, this. Done it 500 times or more, and it's pretty, yeah, brain off, and then know what I'm doing, and it works the same every time. It's one of those things I've had lots of interesting different guitars through here, and some people some people can make the mistake, I suppose, and understandably make the mistake of kind of falling into believing that their particular guitar needs a particular special treatment when it comes to setting up. And one of the things I have to kind of sometimes get people to see without making them feel less special about their particular guitar, which as a combination of things is of course unique, and unique to the model and unique to that particular one, but by and large the principles at work here are all the same for just about every single guitar that was ever made, so long as the guitar has strings, a neck, some frets, a bridge, and so on. You know, the basic components. If it has those, then all of the stuff I'm doing here for Stuart's, oh god, I've gone off on a complete tangent. Everything I'm doing on Stuart's Harley Benton here applies to somebody's Gibson Les Paul, and you know, I totally understand that, you know, when you're in the club and you paid your membership fees, i.e. your £2,000 or whatever it is you paid for your USA Gibson, you know, I understand people wanting to feel that their guitar has very particular and very specific needs and so on and so on, but I have to say, the reason why certain Gibsons play badly is the same reason why Stuart's Harley Benton was playing badly just now. Same problems. Okay, so, and you know, by saying that, I'm not dismissing the specialness of your particular instrument or its heritage or whatever. I'm just saying the basics aren't any different, and it can be the case that sometimes I've had it where people are really nervous when I've said to them, you know, they might say, how long do you need this for? And I'll say, well, 3 hours to do the setup. Maybe a bit longer, so I'm not in, you know, up against the clock, but it's usually 3 hours. And I've seen people in the past get very nervous because part of them wants to believe that their guitar will require a week of thinking about first, you know, to get everything exactly right. And actually, you know, I have to say with kind of sensitivity and respect, if I can't do it, if I can't improve the way it plays in this 3 hour period by doing these things that I do, the same to a Gibson as to a Harley Benton, then I can't improve it. It's as simple as that. And it's quite an interesting process watching an owner kind of letting go of that expectation that it's got to be some special technique that you know, like you bring out a special Gibson fret leveling tool that only works with special American Gibsons because you've paid so much for it, surely ... And I use the same sandpapers and the same banana truss rod, as I call it, and achieve the same improvements. There we go. Now this is interesting. This paper is going underneath this particular fret here, so one of these frets is unusually high, so not unknown for a Harley Benton, so that could be part of the problem. But when all's said and done, high and low have become, you know, in this game are relative terms, so you know, if one is low it makes the other high and vice versa. It doesn't really make any sense to talk about absolutes. There is no absolute high or no absolute low, it's just relative, and what we're aiming for, of course, is a relative evenness between all of them and not some absolute thing either. So it's why it doesn't matter if you achieve that relative levelness on a curve, as we've done here, or whether you achieve it with the neck off flat. There are some reasons, as I explained earlier, why I do it this way, but it doesn't mean... I often say that fret leveling your guitar with the old method, with the neck off or the neck flattened using the truss rod and a straight leveling beam, that is, I would say, that is 95% better than it was before, or not doing it, if you see what I mean. Doing it with a curved truss rod tool like this just adds that little bit more accuracy because of the issue with the compression effects caused by the longitudinal pull or the force of the strings. But in and of itself, you can make a massive improvement to your guitar using the traditional fret leveling method. But as I said, having done both ways and probably a few others besides, there's some, lots of ancillary benefits from doing it this way, which is why I continue. One of them, probably one of the most important ones being, is that I can test the playability at each step of the way and stop when I've got the playability I want, which means I never risk just blindly over leveling in pursuit of some sort of abstract or arbitrary absolute levelness for its own sake. Levelness only matters here in as far as getting the action we've chosen to play cleanly, so the guitarist can get their guitar back and go off and play it, and not have to contend with a high action anymore, and enjoy their guitar with a decent low action. And I've in these things I've stopped kind of going into long explanations, but about why guitars don't come with level frets, and there are all kinds of sort of probably straightforward reasons. Mostly, I can promise you, will be to do with the economics of it. If it takes me a certain amount of time to level these frets, then I promise you that the Chinese mass guitar industry, which Thomann with their Harley Benton product are as much a part of as is anyone else. The profit margins in the business model at work there, well, no way is it going to be able to tolerate another couple of hours of precision labour to get the frets into the sort of precise playing condition that I'm doing here. And honestly, don't be fooled, there isn't a machine that's going to do this. It's as simple as that. I think the Plek stories of the Plek machine are a bit possibly slightly smokes and mirror-ish, if nothing else, but at best a very expensive way of doing what I've done here, or an expensive way of doing what I've done here. But there's no way a manufacturer can make these frets level without putting that financial investment into doing it, and that's going to just knock out the profit margin completely. So there's absolutely no doubt at all why it doesn't get done. Okay, so I'm going to get myself set up with paper, and then I'm going to go off camera and put the radio on and bore myself with some daytime radio when I get this done. 6 1000-1500 followed by micro mesh and a ruler. But the nice thing is, once this sort of fairly brainless process of polishing is done, we're in the sort of home stretch then, and it really then comes down to fine tuning and intonation as well. So I tend to work with these 2 chunks of 6, 2 chunks of 1,000, oh god, 2 chunks of 1,000 and 2 of 15 for this guitar, and then I'll have a set for another one and another one, which I'll put off to one side, and we'll be on our way. So I'll see you when this is done and I'm restringing. Right, woohoo, okay. Polished, back to a plain shine up to 12,000 grit. So basically off comes the masking tape, and then next stop cleaning everything up and then restringing. And at the point of restringing, what I'm listening out for from here on inwards is to make sure that the nut slots are free running, and there isn't the slightest pinging anywhere in the system, and that's really important at this stage. But having done what I've done so far, pretty much guaranteed there won't be. You can see the dust that's built up on there. Be pretty confident there won't be any pinging, but I'm going to be listening out to make sure, and if there is any pinging, then now is the time to take care of it with some sandpaper and a blade by widening the slots, not deepening them, but just widening them. And once I've done that, then I can guarantee you this guitar will stay in tune. Once I've done that, and then as a final thing, I take care of all the slack, wring out all the slack from the new strings. Once I've done all of that, then this guitar will stay in tune, and it will play in tune, stay and play in tune, which will add hugely to the want to go to feeling. You know, you want to go and pick it up and play it, because it's you just only have to do the tiniest tweak to get it in tune, and then it will stay in tune, and that's your job done. Now I've got some new things here which I could use, but I'll open them later. I'll just use old ones and some towel for this. It's a big pile of what do you call that stuff? Lint-free cloth that I bought, which I love having as a final polishing cloth, but I have to cut it up into lots of little squares, so I'll take the environmentally unsound option first, which is a good old kitchen roll, and then just use that quite liberally on the top here, get rid of any amount of dust that's remaining all the way through around the plate, up in the nooks and crannies, and then onto the back. And once that's done, it's a case of restringing with new strings, and then getting the strings stretched out and intonated, and we'll be ready. So a quick bit of a clean off, totally fresh one. Like I say, I think this is probably not quite intonated, judging by the current position of the saddles that I can see with my naked eye. But I could be wrong, but it looks like it could do with a little bit of adjustment, but it shouldn't be much. Okay, so there we have the guitar freshly cleaned after all the work's been done. And there's one more little touch that I want to do now, which is to get some oil onto the fingerboard prior to restringing. Partly because it makes it look nicer, but also because having used the naphtha or the Coleman's cleaning fluid on it to clean off any old gunk, at the same time it sort of takes away some of the oils from the wood, so this is a way of replacing those quickly, and it always makes the wood look a bit richer. So that's that. I'll just take off any standing oil, but leave the rest to sort of soak in. Okay, now we're in the stringing department. So hopefully this one's gone all according to plan. Having just done all the polishing, we're now at 23. So I reckon we'll be finished on just about two hours maybe. But that's you know, non-stop pace really to be ready. So actually no, sorry, it's not 2 hours. It's a bit over, but anyway. Yes, it's sort of a fair old non-stop, no time to kind of sit around. So these saddles are a little bit corroded, I guess is the right word, but they still do their job. And these are rotor sound strings, and they're nicely colour coded, but I think the best thing from my perspective is that they include a spare, usually, unless I buy them in packs of 3, but normally, let's put a curl on this, normally they include a spare high E, which means if I break one whilst stretching the string, which I very often do, I've got a spare to pull out of the hat, get me out of jail. Okay, this one, no, this is a multi-pack I bought, so I don't have a spare in this case, but I do have loads of spare E's kicking around in case I break them, so I don't have to worry. Sometimes it gets quite iffy if I'm doing a particular special guitar where somebody's requested some particular, maybe it might be an 8s or something where I've bought in a pack especially for that guitar, or it could be silk and steel or something like that, which I don't have a lot of in my spares department, and that puts me at a kind of disadvantage because I really can't afford to break anything at that point. What the heck is happening there? Right. Okay, so my stringing technique, which is pretty much, I think, like Stuart had on guitar already, looks like it, a sort of twizzle round locking device. So go through, make sure it's all right the way through, back 1 fret, put these all vertical so they're out of the way, then I go round over the top of the loose one, and then as it comes round the second time, under the loose one as the loose one comes round, and then it sort of performs a little locking action. There we have it. These will all move a little bit as we go, they'll sort of settle themselves into wherever they want to be positioned. But it's quite a nice, simple technique, consistent technique, and you know, it does a form of locking as well, which I quite like. So you can see I'm always keeping pretty much everything under tension as I'm doing this. Which stops me getting any unwanted kinks in the wrong places. Right. Now this one is going to go under the, it's going to end up going under the string tree, but not yet, because I don't want it to drag loads of grease that I put on there all the way through. So I'm going to sort of treat it to begin with as if it hasn't got a string tree, get it up under tension, and then put it under when it's at tension in the right position. There you go. And straighten the tree in line with it. What I can do when I'm at it now is take off these excess bits. I like to cut them really short, because if there's one thing I can't stand, it's getting stung by the string wasps. And I always do at some point. Right, around the G. I do like the old Strat style stringing arrangement. It's so much nicer not having to go back to front when you're doing the stringing like you do on a Les Paul. You have to kind of reverse your technique on the other side of the headstock. Here you just keep on going, winding in the same direction all the way through, which is great. Okay, so just to reconfirm everything that's happened, I've started off by setting the action that I was looking for on this guitar, by choosing the amount of relief, or checking the amount of relief, in which case it was enough, checking the amount of relief, setting the nut slots to, or the first fret action I should say, to a consistent height that I like all the way across, that I found is a good working height, which happens to be, I start at 0.3, it can be 0.4-ish on an acoustic, 0.3 on an electric, down to as little as 0.2 on an electric if necessary, and in this case it stopped, I settled at 0.25 because of the the fact that one of the slots on this nut was already at that height, so I kind of chose to use that as the common denominator. One of the reasons the nut only costs a couple of quid in my setup because I get them from China, but the bone nuts that I use. But the reason I didn't change the nut over here is mainly because this was a bespoke size. Whoever's worked on the nut slot has either widened it, or the original Harley Benton one comes bigger than standard. So it would have meant custom cutting a nut, which is a lot of trouble. Would have taken that, could have run out of time doing that, to be quite honest. Now this one I've ended up going around putting more cable on here than I wanted. I have no idea why that happened, but it's not the end of the world. Something I didn't, and it came back through, that's what happened. It quite often happens, but it's going to be fine. We'll cut out any slack anyway. Right, so that's the strings on. Now, like I said before, the most important part, having taken care of the setup, having taken care of the fret leveling, I can forget all of that stuff. Now I can really concentrate on the final tweaks to the nut slots. So what I'm kind of listening out for, I'm doing a quick stretch first of all to make sure everything's seated, and get the sort of the grossest amount of slack immediately out. But what I'm looking for, the minute I start tuning between each stretching, which I'm about to do, every time I do a tuning, I'm listening for the strings, and if they ping, they're catching in usually the nut slots, and that will be a direct negative effect on the tuning stability. So if I hear a ping in the nut slots, then I want to go in with the sandpaper and a blade and just gently widen them without deepening them. I also need to distinguish between, in this case, the nut slots pinging and the pinging being limited to the string trees, which is partly why I put the grease on the string trees, because that cuts that down so I don't get false ping readings. I just want to be sure that I'm getting rid of all of the catchiness of the nut slots. So I get my reference note. Okay, and once I've tuned it up once, I go back and I stretch the living daylights out of it again. And the payoff of this is going to be that when I give this back to Stuart, he's going to be able to take this home and play this with hardly the slightest of tunings when he gets home, and then he can play it for hours without it going out of tune. And that's the beauty of taking the time to not only take out the slack now, but also to make sure the nut slots are absolutely precise. And you didn't hear any pings on that tuning just then, did you? Because I didn't, which means the nut slots are wide enough and their strings are running smoothly. So again, tuning but listening for pings. So hear how flat that went, so that's all the slack being pulled out still. No pinging. The travel of the strings and the way the tuners feel like they're operating now are totally different from how they were when I got it. 2 hours ago. Okay, one more big stretch, and in the same old way, again stretching both sides of the bridge, the nut, to get out as much of the slack as possible. But yes, transformed how it feels to tune the guitar now, and the fact that it'll now stay in tune once I've got all of the slack out. I'll need a couple more bends, some big note bends and so on, but this will get all of the residual slack out, and the thing will suddenly feel like a different guitar, which is the great part about doing this. So some going flat there, but not a lot. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Light as a feather. It's just automatically in tune. When I tuned it up beforehand, it just didn't seem to go into tune, and that's the experience of a guitar that is unstable at the nut. And what I find is the amazing part about this is that whoever it is that knows about guitar setups somehow seem to so rarely manage to communicate to those who don't or haven't had a guitar setup how important all of that is. And you see people write about it in guitar mags, or you know, in websites or in blogs. But the sheer scale of that improvement never gets, I don't think, ever gets adequately communicated. Amazing. The only thing I'm going to do, it doesn't need it, but I'm going to do it anyway, is put a little bit of graphite into the slots. Now this is, I always say this, but it's the same old bit of information. Notice I'm putting it in when I don't need to. If you try and cure your, that's amazing, the string is actually touching, you can see it's got a little dent on the edge of the thing there. My action is so low relative to how most people, or how the factory does it, the strings eventually come out and hit the back, which is no problem. It just puts a little dent in the back. Often so does the nut file. In truth, to get the action I like out of this, you really can't afford this bit of extra material behind, and the longer that little bit of material behind the nut is, the more you're going to end up with grooves in it if you want a low action. It's just a fact of life. But I think it's a very small price to pay for playability that you get, and Stuart will, I'm pretty confident, see the difference between the two actually when he comes back for this, or the benefit of it I should say. Okay, so I put a little tiny bit of graphite in there, and what I'm going to do is just puff some air at it just to sort of clear it away mostly. It leaves a little bit of a kind of glittery stuff on there, but I always say many times on these videos is if you've if you can't get ping free action without the graphite, don't use the graphite. Sounds a bit silly, but it won't cure it ultimately. Get it running free, do all of what I just did. Do all I just did first. Now I still haven't technically bottomed out or totally fixed the problem that we've got with those low frets, but we've got a kind of compromise with a nice low action and the best possible action whilst preserving the most possible fret material, given what we started with, which was low frets or high frets. I'm going to put the strap on and intonate it with the strap on. Right. So what I'm going to use for that is my thingamajig here, my Tuna on this thing, and I'm going to use the amp. So I use iStrobosoft by Peterson Tuners, and use a pretty clean sounding amp setting, and drop all this. It's too long by miles, this lead, for this function. So again, mostly to get rid of that noise, use the switches a lot. Stretching. pulls, careful pulls to not break our E's or our B's. We're getting all the possible slack out of these strings to remain stable for here on. Might be running slightly out of batteries here. Stretchy, 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 stretchy. Right, I'm going to intonate next. It's a good idea to get as much of the stretch as you can out before you intonate. It just makes it a bit easier, but I'm kind of pretty much there now. Right, let's get ourselves an E. Right, well that's good. The G and the B, sorry, the G and the D appear to be needing to pull back somewhat. So let's do that. Squeak, squeak. And that would be more the expected pattern, to be honest. Yep. looks alright, everything in the right sort of position. Bit more of a pull. Every last bit of stretch out of these strings. Get there. And done. We are intonated. We're in the familiar pattern as would be expected. Pretty much stable tuning. And I'm going to wrap up, just clean down the strings, give the strings a quick clean, and dust it down inside the house, but we are there. Okay, so we're on time, well on time, goodly on time. Twang. So, all good. I'll be able to give Stuart a quick text and say, whenever you're ready. Of course, you can never get dust out from under the strings. As soon as you've done anything for 5 minutes, the dust builds up there. So now I'm looking at a couple of frets here that are definitely sticking up, courtesy of Harley Benton. They've just caught the tissue paper on here. So that's what the kind of big issue really was, sticking up frets. Actually, possibly as much, or if not more than low ones. Hard to be exact. Okay, so I'm going to take this indoors, clean up the last bit of dust, and get ready to go home. All right, see you again. Bye.